I spent Mother's Day completely alone. My children had gone to a friend's gathering, even though just the day before they both promised they would be at the brunch I prepared. I sat in the quiet living room and cried through most of the afternoon. Later that night they finally returned, but only to ask for money to pay their bills. What they didn't know was that I had already bought a one-way ticket, and that single decision changed everything for me. That I had set the table at 11 o'clock that morning. Fresh tablecloth, my best dishes and the cloth napkins I ironed the night before. In the center I placed a small flower arrangement I had bought with the last bit of my monthly check. The chicken was roasting in the oven, the potatoes peeled, the salad chilled. Everything ready for a warm Mother's Day meal. I had made sure beforehand. I called Tanisha first. She answered quickly, speaking like she always did when juggling other things. I asked if they were coming. "Yes, Mama. We'll be there," she said without hesitation. Then I called Malik. He was short and direct. "Yeah, Ma. We're coming. Don't stress." He hung up fast, but I felt hopeful. I truly believed this year would be different, that they would remember and show up for once. I sat on the living room sofa and waited. At noon, still nothing. By 12:30, a familiar worry started pressing on my chest. At 1 o'clock the chicken was done. The house filled with a warm smell, but the silence remained. I finished setting the table and sat down, trying to be patient. By 2 o'clock I called Tanisha. No answer. I tried Malik, straight to voicemail. I called again and again, still nothing. The food was turning cold, and so was my hope. That I walked to the window. Outside, families strolled together, laughing, carrying flowers, holding hands. Mothers hugged by their grown children. I watched them for a moment and then went back to the table. I sat down across from all those empty plates and finally understood. They weren't coming. Not again. Just like last year. Just like my birthday. Just like Christmas. There was always something more important than me. I stayed at that table for longer than I can remember. The hours crawled. 3 o'clock. The sunlight softened and the shadows grew long across the room. I felt the weight of all the times I had waited, and a quiet certainty settled in. Something in my life needed to change, and this time I was ready to change it myself. The house was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Even my heartbeat sounded loud in that empty room. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, I finally stood up and put all the untouched food into the fridge. No one was going to eat any of it. I cleared the table, folded the linens, put the napkins back in the drawer and dropped the flowers into the trash. They had already wilted, much like the way I felt inside. Then I sat back on the sofa and the tears came again. They weren't dramatic. They were soft, quiet tears that come from a tired heart. The kind that slip out when you've held everything in for too long. That I cried for all the Mother's Days I had spent alone. I cried thinking about each broken promise, every time they said they'd show up and didn't. I cried because I gave my life to raise them, and they couldn't give me one simple afternoon. I'm 70 years old. 70 years of living, nearly 5 decades of being a mother. And in that silent room I finally accepted something I had pushed away for years. My children cared, but not in the way I had hoped. Not enough to show up. Not enough to think about me. Not enough to stay close. The night slowly settled in and I didn't bother turning on a single light. I just sat there with the darkness and that heavy pressure in my chest. I thought about calling them again or sending a message or telling them how much it hurt. But I knew exactly what they'd say. "Sorry, Mama. Things got busy. Next time." And next time never came. It was almost 10 o'clock when I heard a car pull up outside. I recognized Malik's engine right away. Then came voices, laughter, footsteps, the key turning and the front door opening. They switched on the living room light and froze when they saw me sitting there in the dark, eyes swollen, face tired. A part of my spirit just crumbled in that moment. Tanisha spoke first. "Hey, Mama. We just thought we'd drop by." She was dressed up, makeup perfect, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and an evening out. Malik walked in behind her. New shirt, shiny shoes, looking pleased with himself. "Hey, Ma. How was your day?" he asked lightly, like nothing had happened. I couldn't answer. My throat tightened and the words wouldn't come out. I looked at them and everything became clear. While I was sitting here alone, they had been out enjoying themselves, laughing and celebrating. Tanisha sat in the armchair, Malik stood nearby, and the room filled with uncomfortable silence. Then Tanisha checked her phone and looked at me seriously. "Mama, we need to talk about something important." Malik moved closer and sat on the arm of the sofa. "Yeah, Ma, we've got a problem. We need your help. Tanisha nodded. It's urgent. The bills are stacking up, his rent, my card payments. Comes to around 3,000. We need you to help us out. I stared at them. My grown children, the ones I worked myself to the bone for, the ones I sacrificed everything for. They hadn't been able to give me a single hour on Mother's Day, but they showed up the moment they needed money. Something inside me cracked then, something that wasn't going to mend this time. While they talked, I thought about the envelope tucked away in my bedroom. The one with the bus ticket. A one-way trip. No return date. They had no idea what was coming next. They had no idea I had already reached my limit. They didn't know this would be the last time they saw me sitting there quietly, saying nothing, always available whenever they needed something. They didn't know that the woman they were speaking to was about to disappear from their everyday lives. While they went on and on about bills, problems, and deadlines, my mind was somewhere else entirely. My name is Vivian Sterling. I'm 70 years old. And I already have my one-way ticket. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when my children would run into my arms the moment they walked through the door. A time when Tanisha would burst in shouting, "Mama," before wrapping her arms around my neck. A time when Malik would tug on my sleeve, eager to tell me everything he learned at school. There were days when I felt needed, days when their faces lit up when they saw me. We didn't have money, but we had each other. Or at least that's what I believed. We lived in a tiny house on the edge of Cloverdale, Georgia. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen so small we could barely move around it together. My husband, Marcus, worked long hours in construction. I cleaned houses. Between the two of us, we managed enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. There was nothing extra, but we survived. Tanisha was 6 then, Malik was 4. They ran barefoot through the yard, playing with rocks, sticks, anything they could find. We didn't have toys, but they didn't know the difference yet. They were just kids, happy with whatever life gave them. Every night I bathed them in our old chipped bathtub. I washed their hair, trimmed their nails, and dressed them in the clothes I had scrubbed by hand that same afternoon. I tucked them into bed and told them simple stories until their eyes closed. Those moments were my world. They gave me purpose, strength, and a reason to push through each day. Marcus was a good man, quiet, steady, loyal. He didn't say much, but when he did, his words were sincere. He'd come home dusty and exhausted, sit at the table and eat whatever I cooked. Sometimes he would look at me and say, "Thank you, Vivian." And that was enough. I didn't dream of anything more back then. But everything changed the day Marcus died. A construction accident. A heavy beam fell the wrong way. They told me it was quick, as if that made the loss any easier to bear. He was only 42. I was 38. Tanisha was 12, Malik just 10. In a single moment I became a widow with 2 children and no plan, no savings, no safety net, just determination. The benefits they gave me after his passing were barely anything. $500 a month. It couldn't even cover groceries. So I worked. Harder than I ever had. I cleaned 3 houses every morning. Washed other people's clothes in the afternoon. Ironed late into the night. On the best nights I slept 4 hours. Most nights even less. I woke up before the sun and collapsed into bed long after it went down. My hands became rough, my back ached constantly and my knees weakened. But none of that mattered to me. As long as my children had what they needed, I kept going. Even when I felt like I had nothing left to give, I still pushed forward because they were my reason for living. I kept going because Tanisha and Malik always had food on the table. Because they could attend school. Because they had clean clothes, shoes that fit, and a mother who would do anything for them. I was willing to give every bit of myself to make sure they had a better life than I did. Tanisha, being the oldest, grew up faster than she should have. She was serious, responsible, and always trying to help. She watched Malik when I worked late, made simple dinners for him, and sat beside him while he did homework. She was still just a child, but she carried the weight of a much older person. I felt guilty for that. Guilty that her childhood slipped away too soon because I needed her help. Malik was different. He was bright, cheerful, always imagining new things. He drew on every scrap of paper he found. He used to tell me he would become an artist one day, make a name for himself, buy me a big home, and make sure I never had to work again. I believed him wholeheartedly. Mothers believe their children even when the world tells them not to. Years went by and they grew older. The house seemed smaller with every passing year. Tanisha started noticing what other people had. Bigger homes, nicer clothes, newer things. She would look at me with a quiet disappointment, as if I had failed her by not providing more. Those looks hurt more deeply than anything she could have said out loud. Malik changed too. He stopped drawing, stopped dreaming the way he used to. He spent more time out with boys his age. When he came home late, he barely spoke to me. His answers were short, his eyes distant, like he no longer belonged in the home where he grew up. But I kept working, kept pushing myself because that's what mothers do. I held on to the hope that one day they would understand all the sacrifices I made, that one day they would simply say, "Thank you, Mama." When Tanisha turned 18, she found work at a shop downtown. She started making her own money. I thought just for a moment that maybe things would get easier. Maybe she could help with a bill here or there, or at least ease the pressure on my shoulders. But she saved every dollar for herself. New clothes, shoes, makeup, nights out with friends. And when I gently asked if she could contribute anything toward the house, she looked at me like I was asking for something impossible. Malik barely managed to finish school. He didn't want college. He said it wasn't for him, that he'd find a job and make his own path. I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength left to force anything. He got a job at a mechanic shop. The pay was small, but it was something, and I hoped he might stay home and help. But after 6 months he told me he was moving out. He said he needed space, that he was grown now and couldn't live with his mother forever. I stayed quiet. I didn't tell him how abandoned I felt. I didn't tell him how afraid I was to be alone in that quiet house. Instead, I helped him pack. I even gave him money for his first month's rent. Money I didn't truly have, taken from the tiny savings I was trying to hold on to. And I watched him walk out without even turning back. Tanisha left 2 years after that. She met someone, fell in love, and got married. She invited me to the wedding, but it felt more like an obligation than a real wish to have me there. I went anyway. I sat quietly in a corner, unnoticed. No one greeted me, no one introduced me to anyone, no one acknowledged me as anything more than a formality. I was the mother of the bride, present, but invisible. Tanisha's marriage lasted barely 3 years. When it ended, she came back to my home in tears, saying her husband had betrayed her, treated her badly, and left her with nothing. I opened my door without a second thought. She was my daughter. Of course I took her in. But she never thanked me. She stayed for 6 months, healed, found someone new, and left again without even saying goodbye. It hurt, but I kept quiet. I was just glad she was safe. Malik never settled down. He dated many women, always short-term, always the same pattern. He brought them to meet me only when he wanted to impress them. "This is my mama," he'd say, pretending to praise me while hinting about how I lived alone and gave up everything for my kids. I could see the pity in those girls' eyes. That kind of pity makes you feel small, like you're invisible in your own life. But I swallowed it. I told myself it didn't matter as long as my children were happy. The years rolled on. I kept working, even when my body started breaking down. I couldn't clean houses like I used to. My back ached every morning. My hands shook. My knees barely held my weight. But I still pushed myself because Tanisha and Malik kept coming to me whenever they needed help. It was always money. $200 for rent, $300 for some bill, $500 for an emergency. They hardly ever explained. And I always gave. Even when it meant cutting my medicine in half. Even when it meant eating less. Even when I had to keep the heat off in winter to save a little money. I thought one day they would understand how much I loved them. But that day never came. They kept taking, kept asking, kept forgetting about me. Until that Mother's Day. I sat there crying in an empty house, waiting for them, hoping they might show up for once. And they walked in that night smelling like they'd been out celebrating, laughing, enjoying a life I never had. Only to ask me for $3,000 as casually as asking for a glass of water. That's when something inside me shifted. I realized nothing would ever change. I could give until I had nothing left, and they would still come back asking for more without a word of thanks, without remembering my sacrifices, without even seeing me as a person. That night, for the first time in many years, I told them no. I said I didn't have the money. And it was true, I didn't. My whole monthly check was only $1,200, and from that I had to pay utilities, food, and medicine. Tanisha's face tightened with irritation. "Unbelievable, Mama. Right when we actually need you, you have nothing." She spoke like I owed her something, like helping her was my duty. Malik stepped forward, frustrated. "Ma, this is serious. These are real bills. We'll be in trouble if we don't pay." He expected me to give in because I always did. But this time I stayed firm. I told them again I couldn't help. I barely had enough to take care of myself. Tanisha stood up, annoyed. Malik thanked me in a flat voice. A thank you that meant nothing. They walked out without looking at me, without asking how I felt, without noticing the table still set from earlier that day. They didn't care that it was Mother's Day, that I had spent the whole afternoon waiting, that I'd been crying for hours. They left, closing the door behind them, and I stayed alone once more in that silent house. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there thinking about everything. The years I had put them first, the times I went hungry so they could eat, the times I worked while sick just to afford their school supplies. And it hit me how little any of it mattered to them. To them, I wasn't their mother. I was just where you go when you need money. A place, not a person. The next morning, exhausted but determined, I did something I rarely did. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and made a decision. I was going to find out the truth. But something felt wrong. Both my children had jobs. They earned more than I did. So why were they always broke? Why were they always asking me for money? I took my phone and opened social media. Something I hardly ever touched. Tanisha had shown me how it worked once, so I tried to remember. I typed her name, found her account, and suddenly everything made sense. There were photos. So many photos. Tanisha at fancy restaurants. Tanisha in new outfits. Tanisha on beach trips. Tanisha at parties, smiling, laughing, enjoying herself. She was living a life she claimed she couldn't afford, while asking me for help with her rent. I scrolled more. Pictures from last week, from yesterday, even from the very night she skipped Mother's Day brunch. She was all dressed up, surrounded by friends. The caption said, "Perfect day with my favorites, 2 hearts sparkles, perfect day," while I sat alone waiting for her, and my heart sank. While Tanisha celebrated a perfect day with friends and Malik enjoyed nights out, concerts and new purchases, I sat alone with a table full of untouched food, realizing their lives didn't match their constant pleas for help. But nothing shocked me more than a screenshot Tanisha accidentally posted from a private chat called the Sterling Kids, where they called me the old woman, joked about how I always believed their stories, and said I could fund them a little longer. My hands trembled as I stared at those words, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw a tired 70-year-old woman who had spent her entire life working, sacrificing, and giving without ever being truly seen. When I counted the papers in my drawer, I realized I had given them $20,000 in 5 years. Money they wasted on luxuries while pretending it was for emergencies. That night, a truth settled deep inside me. If I didn't change my life, nothing would ever change. So I turned on the old computer and searched for retirement communities by the ocean, dreaming of a quiet life where I could simply be Vivian again. Not an obligation, not a wallet, not the old woman. I wrote down names, numbers and addresses, and for the first time in decades I planned something for myself. My escape, my freedom. But before I left, I needed to uncover the whole truth, so I decided to quietly observe my children, and for that I called the only person who had ever stayed loyal to me. My old neighbor Ellie Johnson, the one friend who never forgot kindness. Ellie picked up on the second ring, her warm voice reminding me what real care sounded like, and when we met the next morning over coffee and pastries, I finally told her everything, showing her the screenshots, the receipts, the photos, all the proof of how my own children had treated me, and she simply held my hand and said, "Vivian, this has to end." With her help, I met her nephew Avery, a young lawyer who listened to me more sincerely than anyone had in years. He explained that I owed my children nothing, that I still had rights, choices, and control over my home and my future. And though his $500 fee felt overwhelming, Ellie insisted on lending it to me because she wanted me to be safe. Leaving his office, I felt as if someone had switched on a light inside me. Suddenly I could see clearly that I didn't have to keep living as if everything I owned automatically belonged to Tanisha and Malik. That night, I reviewed all my documents and realized how much needed to change. But before making any final decisions, I wanted to observe them myself. So I began quietly watching their lives, passing by Malik's workplace and Tanisha's apartment, gathering silent truths I had ignored for years. One afternoon, I saw Malik leave the mechanic shop with a much younger woman and step into a car I'd never seen before. New, shiny, expensive. And when I followed them on the bus, I watched them walk into a fancy restaurant, holding hands, laughing, ordering wine, living comfortably while insisting they were struggling. I stayed outside for 2 hours, watching them enjoy a meal that cost more than my entire week's groceries, and in that moment, every doubt I had left slowly dissolved into certainty. They kissed on the sidewalk, got into the car and drove away, and I went home on the last bus of the night feeling tired and sad but more certain than ever that I was finally doing the right thing. The next day I watched Tanisha leave her office with 2 friends, follow them into a clothing store and heard her casually buy a $200 dress while saying she had already cleared the debts she'd begged me to help her with just 2 weeks earlier, and that moment hurt more than I expected. I left before they noticed me and went home to write everything down. Every lie, every expense, every date, before calling Avery to update him, and he told me the information would help me make the best decisions for my future. Together we created a new will, changed the beneficiaries on my accounts, and opened a hidden bank account where my money would be safe. I moved most of my pension there and kept only the minimum in the old account so everything looked the same to my children. With Ellie's help, I began selling old items from the house and saved every small amount in what I quietly started calling my escape fund, because I knew that was exactly what it would become. I spent evenings searching bus tickets, looking up places far from here, and eventually found a calm coastal town 600 miles away with simple homes near the ocean. A dream I had put aside my whole life. And even though I hadn't bought the ticket yet, I knew the day was coming. Weeks passed without a single call or message from Tanisha or Malik. But instead of feeling abandoned, I felt strangely peaceful because for the first time I was choosing myself. Ellie visited often, bringing kindness and encouragement, reminding me that after giving 50 years to my children, I deserved to give at least a few good years back to myself. And her words settled in my heart as I finally admitted that, at 70, I wanted whatever time I had left to be lived on my own terms, with dignity. They kissed on the sidewalk, got into the car and drove away, and I went home on the last bus of the night feeling tired and sad but more certain than ever that I was finally doing the right thing. The next day I watched Tanisha leave her office with 2 friends, follow them into a clothing store, and heard her casually buy a $200 dress while saying she had already cleared the debts she'd begged me to help her with just 2 weeks earlier. And that moment hurt more than I expected. I left before they noticed me and went home to write everything down. Every lie, every expense, every date, before calling Avery to update him, and he told me the information would help me make the best decisions for my future. Together we created a new will, changed the beneficiaries on my accounts, and opened a hidden bank account where my money would be safe. I moved most of my pension there and kept only the minimum in the old account so everything looked the same to my children. With Ellie's help, I began selling old items from the house and saved every small amount in what I quietly started calling my escape fund, because I knew that was exactly what it would become. I spent evenings searching bus tickets, looking up places far from here, and eventually found a calm coastal town 600 miles away with simple homes near the ocean. A dream I had put aside my whole life, and even though I hadn't bought the ticket yet, I knew the day was coming. Weeks passed without a single call or message from Tanisha or Malik. But instead of feeling abandoned, I felt strangely peaceful because for the first time I was choosing myself. Ellie visited often, bringing kindness and encouragement, reminding me that after giving 50 years to my children, I deserved to give at least a few good years back to myself. And her words settled in my heart as I finally admitted that, at 70, I wanted whatever time I had left to be lived on my own terms, with dignity, freedom, and a little bit of hope. The days crawled by, each one making me more nervous yet also more determined, though doubts crept in at times, questioning whether I was being too harsh or cruel. But then I remembered Mother's Day, the lies, the way they had called me the old woman, and the doubts vanished. Ellie visited every day, helping me prepare, listening patiently as I rehearsed, reminding me that I was strong, brave, and doing the right thing, and her support was the anchor that kept me steady. 2 weeks before the dinner, Malik called, demanding $500 for car repairs, insisting it was urgent, but I told him I didn't have it and hung up when he got angry. 2 days later, I saw a photo of the same car running perfectly on social media. Another lie. On the day of the dinner, I rose early and cleaned the house, not for them but for myself, determined that my final dinner as their mother in this house would be dignified. I cooked all day, preparing their childhood favorites: roast chicken, scalloped potatoes, fresh salad, homemade bread, and chocolate dessert. I set the table with my finest china, silverware, crystal glasses, and embroidered linens. Everything perfect, beautiful, as a statement of what they had ignored for so long. By 6, the house was ready, the food laid out, the envelopes and documents prepared. I bathed, dressed in a simple black dress, did my hair, and applied a touch of makeup, seeing in the mirror a woman no longer afraid, ready to speak the truth. At 7, they arrived in Malik's car, laughing as if it were just another ordinary dinner, as if I were the same timid mother they had always taken for granted. I opened the door calmly, greeting them with a firm, measured smile. "Come in. I was expecting you." Tanisha offered a quick, meaningless kiss on the cheek, Malik a brief mechanical hug, and they settled into the living room, commenting on the house, asking about the food and chatting about trivial things. I served them cheap wine, observing silently, counting the minutes, waiting for the right moment. Half an hour later I led them to the dining room, and as they admired the table and complimented the food, I remained quiet, watching for any sign of the children they once were, but saw only two selfish adults enjoying my efforts, expecting something in return. When dinner ended, I cleared the dishes, brushing off Tanisha's offer to help, and returned to the dining room carrying a tray with 3 envelopes, the documents, and all the evidence I had gathered, placing everything squarely in the center of the table, knowing that there was no turning back now. They stared at the tray with curiosity and expectation, probably assuming it held money or something they could claim, but I sat down, looked them both in the eyes, Tanisha first, then Malik, and spoke. In a voice firmer, clearer, and stronger than I had expected. I told them I had called because there was something important I needed to say, something I had held inside for far too long, something I could no longer keep silent about. They nodded, still not fully understanding. I told them I knew everything. Their lies, the way they mocked me, the cruel nickname old woman, their made-up emergencies, their so-called urgent debts, everything false and calculated. Their expressions shifted. Tanisha's smile vanished, Malik's eyes widened, and though they tried to speak, I held up my hand and said, "No. You've had years to talk, to lie. Now you listen." I placed the first envelope on the table, the one with the screenshots, laying each conversation in front of them so they could not deny it. Their mockery, their plans to take from me, all real, all undeniable. Tanisha went pale. Malik froze, staring at the papers as if the truth were impossible, as if I hadn't uncovered their secret. "Mama," Tanisha started, but I interrupted firmly. "I'm not interested in what you meant to say. I'm only interested in what you actually said, and what you said is enough." Malik tried to justify himself, claiming it had been months ago, that they were only joking. I looked him in the eyes. "Don't lie to me anymore, Malik. Don't disrespect me in my own home. Those conversations were 2 weeks ago and you weren't joking. You were revealing what you truly think of me." I then placed more papers on the table. Receipts, records of every penny I had given them over 5 years. $20,000 in total. Money they had claimed was for emergencies, debts, or survival. I showed them the photos from their social media. Tanisha at expensive restaurants, Malik in a new car, both of them traveling, wearing designer clothes, living comfortably while telling me they were broke and asking me for money I barely had. "This is what you did with my sacrifice," I said. "While I ate cheap meals to give you more, while I skipped buying medicine, while I broke myself so you could be comfortable, you spent my love and my labor on luxuries, on whims, on things you didn't need." Tanisha opened her mouth to speak. "Mama, let me explain." I cut her off, my voice steady and cold. "There is nothing to explain. The numbers don't lie. The photos don't lie. Your words don't lie. The only ones lying here are you, and you have been doing it for years." Malik jumped from his chair, calling everything ridiculous and accusing me of overreacting over private conversations, insisting everyone says things they don't mean around friends, but I simply told him to sit down and something in my voice made him obey. Tanisha's eyes filled with fake tears, tears of being caught, not of true regret, and I told them about Mother's Day, how I had confirmed with them the day before, how I prepared everything, waited all afternoon, cried alone in that empty room while they were at a party without a single thought of me. Tanisha sobbed an apology, calling it a mistake, and I told her that forgetting milk is a mistake, being late is a mistake, but abandoning your mother on Mother's Day is a choice. Malik kept his head down, unable to deny anything. I told them that the night they came asking for $3,000 was the moment something broke inside me, the moment I realized I would never be enough, that I was simply a source of money to them. Then I placed Avery's documents on the table, the new will, the bank updates, and told them this was my announcement. Everything had changed. Tanisha froze and asked what that meant, and I told her it meant I had taken control, that the manipulation and lies were over, that they would not get another cent from me. Malik stood again, shouting that I couldn't do this, that they had rights, and I looked him straight in the eyes and told him he had a right to nothing, that every cent I owned was earned by my hands, my sacrifices, and I had every right to protect it. I showed them the bank papers and explained the new account, that my money was safe, that they would never have access to it again. Tanisha stood up with anger twisting her face and accused Ellie of manipulating me, and I told her Ellie was the only person who had treated me with dignity in years, the only one who saw me as a human being instead of an item. Malik paced the room, insisting they had always loved me, that they had always been there for me, and I laughed. Because where were they on Mother's Day, on my birthday, when I was sick, when I needed them? Nowhere. They only appeared when they wanted something. Finally, I handed them the envelopes with their names, telling them to open them or not because I no longer cared. Tanisha opened her envelope with shaking hands, found the small set of keys, and read the note explaining they belonged to a safe deposit box holding a few keepsakes from her father and nothing more. She looked at me in disbelief and asked if that was really all, and I quietly confirmed it was. Malik didn't even bother opening his envelope. He just left it on the table. For a moment we all sat there in a heavy silence filled with years of hurt, missed chances, and a bond that had been broken long before this night. Tanisha tried one last time, begging for another chance, promising they could change and be better, but I told her calmly that they had already been given years of opportunities. Every forgotten Mother's Day, every moment I struggled to help them, every time I forgave them despite the pain. Malik stepped toward me, holding my shoulders, telling me I was angry and making a mistake, insisting they were my family and all I had, and I gently removed his hands, telling him that was exactly the sad truth, that what I had was nothing but two grown children who only remembered me when they needed something. I told them the night was over, that I had said everything I needed, and there was nothing left to discuss. Tanisha cried again, maybe real tears this time, maybe not, but I no longer tried to guess. Malik stared at me like I was someone he had never met, and maybe that was true. He had never cared to know me beyond what I could give him. I walked to the door, opened it, and stood waiting. My voice didn't shake when I told them to go. Tanisha rushed past me in tears. Malik followed and paused at the doorway to warn me this wasn't over. But I told him firmly that it was final. I watched them walk to the car, saw Malik hit the steering wheel in frustration and Tanisha wiping her eyes before they drove away. When their car lights disappeared, I closed the door and stood alone in the quiet hallway. I expected sadness or fear, but instead I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, like removing a painful shoe after a long day or finally setting down a weight I had carried far too long. Then I returned to the dining room, breathing easier than I had in years. I looked at the table. The dirty dishes, scattered papers, open envelopes, all the mess that held the truth of my life, and I quietly began to clean it piece by piece. With every dish I washed and every item I put away, it felt like I was also putting away the old version of myself. The Vivian who endured everything in silence, who accepted so little, who tried to make a family out of children who only remembered her when it suited them. That version of me would stay behind in this house, because in 2 months the new Vivian would board a bus and finally start over. The days that followed were quiet and strange. At first I thought they might call or try to make things right, but a week passed, then another, and there wasn't a single call or message. It hurt. Of course it hurt, to see how easy it was for them to let me disappear, but their silence became the final confirmation that I had made the right decision. Ellie came every day to keep me company and help me pack little by little. Clothes, a few books, photographs, just enough to build a new life without dragging the past with me. I hired a real estate lawyer and put the house up for sale, the house I had lived in for 42 years, the house where I raised my children, where my husband died, where memories, both good and painful, lived in every corner. The lawyer said he could get a good price, $100,000, and that we could close in a month. I didn't tell Tanisha or Malik. I owed them nothing. This house was mine, paid for with my labor, Marcus's pension, and years of sacrifice they never cared to understand. I started giving things away. Furniture, appliances, little treasures, gifting them to neighbors who had shown me more kindness than my own children ever had. Miss Eva Carter took the dining table and hugged me with a gratitude I had rarely felt in my own family, and Mr. George took the sofa. The woman who sold flowers on the corner happily accepted the television. Each thing that left the house made me feel lighter, like I was gently cutting ropes that had kept me tied to a life of sadness. Then 3 weeks after that final dinner, there was a knock at my door. Tanisha standing alone, looking hesitant and serious. I let her in not because I forgave her, but because I wanted to see what she had come to say. She noticed immediately that the house was nearly empty. "Where's the sofa?" she asked, and when I told her I had given it away, her face tightened as she insisted it was family property. I reminded her calmly that it belonged to me and her father, not to her. She took a breath and said she came to talk, to apologize, to try to fix things. I listened, then asked whether Malik also felt remorse. She lowered her head and admitted he was a little resistant, claiming I had been too harsh. I repeated her words, a little resistant, because we both knew what it meant. He didn't come because he didn't care enough. Only she came, and I told her honestly that she came because she feared losing the inheritance, not because she cared about me. Because I don't want to lose you, Tanisha said, and I walked to the window, looking out at the street, feeling the weight of her words. You don't want to lose me, I replied, but you lost me years ago, Tanisha, when you chose your parties over me, when you decided lying was acceptable, when you called me the old woman behind my back. You lost me every time you failed to value me. She tried to plead, desperate, promising to make up for lost time, to visit more, to call more, to do brunch together, anything to start over, but I shook my head. It was too late. I told her I had sold the house, that I was leaving, that I had bought a bus ticket to a place she would never find, that I was going to start a new life as Vivian, not just as someone's mother. Her face went pale, but she asked the wrong questions. Where? For how long? Because all she truly cared about was the inheritance, not the woman standing before her. I refused to answer, explaining I was leaving forever. She pleaded, claiming it was crazy, worrying about what people would say. I told her they could say whatever they wanted. It no longer mattered. She cried, real tears this time, but I had cried enough for both of them. You can't do this to us, she said, but I replied firmly that she didn't need me. She needed my money, my security, my convenience, but she had never needed me, the person I truly was. When she tried to hug me, I stepped back. No more fake hugs, no more empty words. It was over, and when she left, she closed the door slowly, as if slowing it down could lessen the pain, but it didn't. I stood there waiting to feel something, guilt, sadness, regret, but felt only peace, clarity, and certainty that I was finally doing the right thing. That night, Ellie came for dinner, and I told her everything about Tanisha's visit. She listened quietly over the soup she had prepared, then said, I'm proud of you, Vivian. So proud. Her words pierced my soul because no one had been proud of me in years. My children never were. Marcus perhaps, but he never said it aloud. I handed Ellie an envelope with money she had lent me, and though she tried to return it, I insisted she keep it, not just as payment, but as thanks for seeing me, for listening, for treating me like a person. She accepted, and we hugged. Truly hugged, a hug that meant something, that reminded me I was not alone. We cried together, but they were tears of liberation, of friendship, of two women who understood each other without words. The following days passed in a whirlwind. The house sale accelerated, closing in 2 weeks. Perfect, I thought. Avery helped with every detail, ensuring the $100,000 went directly to my secret account, my escape fund, my freedom secured. It was more money than I had ever held in my life, and it was all mine. Money for my new beginning, for emergencies, for whatever future I chose, and no one but me would ever touch it. I withdrew only $5,000 in cash and left the rest safely in the bank, protected from everyone, especially from the very people who had drained me for years. A week before leaving, Malik texted me for the first time since the dinner, asking me to reconsider, telling me not to do anything crazy, begging me to think of the family, but I had no words left to give, so I deleted the message and blocked him, then did the same to Tanisha. Moving day arrived, and the company came for the few boxes I kept. I shipped them ahead to Coastal Haven, the small hotel where I would stay before finding a place of my own. The house was empty when I walked through it one last time. The bedroom Marcus and I shared, the rooms where my children grew up, the kitchen filled with years of meals and moments, the living room where that lonely Mother's Day had changed everything. I said goodbye to each space without nostalgia, only acceptance, because the past belonged to this house and my future didn't need these walls. I closed the door, handed the keys to the lawyer, signed the final document, and just like that, 42 years of my life ended with a signature and a handshake. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I simply walked forward. That last night I stayed at Ellie's house, sleeping on her sofa, talking late into the night about dreams, about freedom, about the ocean I would soon see. At dawn the sky was clear, as if the universe was quietly cheering me on. Ellie had coffee ready. We shared a peaceful breakfast, the kind only true friends understand. She drove me to the terminal with my single small suitcase filled with only what mattered: documents, clothes, and photographs of Marcus and my parents. I left behind the photos of Tanisha and Malik because they no longer belonged to my heart. We arrived early, sat together on a bench holding hands like sisters, and Ellie told me she knew I would be okay, that I would find the peace I deserved. And for the first time in years I believed her. But then something unexpected happened. I looked up and saw Tanisha rushing toward me with Malik behind her, their faces pale with panic as if the reality of my leaving had finally struck them. Ellie immediately stood and positioned herself between us, protective and steady, ready to shield me from the very people who had broken me for so long. "What are you doing here?" Ellie asked, but Tanisha ignored her and went straight to me, begging me not to leave, insisting we needed to talk, while Malik added that I couldn't just disappear. I stayed calm and asked how they knew where I would be, and Tanisha admitted she had called Ellie crying, begging for a chance to say goodbye. I wasn't angry, Ellie had only tried to help. I stood and gave them 5 minutes. Malik immediately accused me of betraying them by selling their house without telling them, and Tanisha insisted it was their inheritance, their future, but I reminded them the house had always been mine and that they only cared about what they would receive once I died, never about what they had given while I was alive. They swore they cared. Malik insisted I mattered. Tanisha begged for another chance, but I told her she had 50 years for that chance and I had no time left to wait. Then I handed them the final envelopes I had prepared, asking them to open them later, though Tanisha tore hers open immediately. As they read the letters, their faces turned pale at the truth I had finally written. The sacrifices, the years I went without, the work I did sick, the money I spent for them while neglecting myself, every detail they never cared to notice. I told them in the letters about the $100,000 from the house sale, and that not a single cent would go to them while I lived. I explained that I had changed my will. 50% to Ellie for her dignity and kindness, 25% to a charity for abandoned elderly women, and the last 25% split between them only if they were still alive when my time came. Malik protested it couldn't be legal, but I assured him Avery had handled everything properly and that I had every right to decide what happened to my own money and my own life. Tanisha begged again, asking me to stay to live near them, promising they would take care of me, but I told her everything was already done. The ticket bought, the sale closed, the goodbyes spoken. When the final call for my bus to Coastal Haven came, Ellie hugged me and whispered for me to be happy and to call when I could. As I turned to leave, Tanisha grabbed my arm and asked, "Mama, do you hate us?" I stopped, met her eyes and told her the simple truth. "I don't hate you. But I don't love you enough to keep sacrificing myself for you either," I told them, and that was the difference. Love has to be mutual, reciprocal, and ours never was. Malik stepped forward, asking what they were to me now, and I said simply nothing, harsher than intended, but the truth. They had always treated me as nothing, as a source of funds, an obligation, someone who existed only because she had to, and now I didn't have to and I chose not to. I walked toward the boarding gate. They followed a few steps, then stopped, finally realizing there was nothing left to do, that their mother was truly leaving because of them. I showed my ticket, the driver checked my bag and I climbed aboard, choosing a window seat. I watched Ellie waving goodbye, smiling, while Tanisha and Malik stood motionless behind her, processing what had just happened. Their mother gone, their source of money gone, with no one to turn to. As the bus pulled away and the city shrank behind me, I felt my chest expand, my heart calm, breathing easier than I had in decades. I leaned back, closing my eyes, thinking of what I had left. My house, my memories, my children, and of what I had gained. Freedom, dignity, the chance to live for myself, to see the ocean. Hours passed, the landscape changed from buildings to fields, trees, mountains, beauty I had never noticed because I was always too busy with others. An older lady across the aisle smiled, asking if I traveled alone, calling me brave, and I realized she was right. It had taken courage to leave everything familiar to start anew, and I had it. I thought of Tanisha and Malik for a moment, then stopped. No longer my responsibility, no longer my burden. I opened a new notebook and wrote, "My name is Vivian Sterling. I'm 70 years old and today I begin to live for the first time in my life. I begin to live for me." At dawn, the bus arrived in Coastal Haven and for the first time in decades I felt hope, the hope that something good was coming. I took a cab through narrow streets lined with low pastel houses, past people moving slowly without stress, and then I saw it. The immense ocean shimmering under the morning sun. Breathless, I realized that 70 years of life had never brought me this moment, never brought me this dream made real. The hotel was small, cozy, and welcoming. Brenda Hayes, the kind owner, greeted me with a smile as if she had always known me, and in that moment I felt it. I was finally free, finally myself, and this was just the beginning. "Welcome to Coastal Haven," Brenda said with a warm smile, assuring me I would be happy there, and something inside me knew she was right. My room faced the open ocean, and when I lifted the window, a fresh salty breeze filled the space. carrying a feeling of new beginnings. I sat on the bed, stared at the endless horizon and cried softly, not from sadness, but from relief and gratitude for finally reaching a place I had long needed. After unpacking, showering and changing, I went downstairs for breakfast, where Brenda served hot coffee and freshly baked bread. I told her I was starting over and needed a permanent place, and she mentioned several small, affordable homes with ocean views. Later, I walked along the boardwalk at an easy pace, taking in the calm sea, the fishermen, the birds, and the peaceful locals. Such a contrast to the life I had left behind. I sat on a bench and listened to the waves, the most soothing sound I had ever heard, reminding me that I had made the right choice and deserved this new chapter. An older woman in a large hat sat beside me. She introduced herself as Miss Gloria Jenkins, who had moved there years ago for her own fresh start. We talked for hours about the town and the simple, gentle rhythm of life there, and she invited me to a weekly group of older women who had also come in search of peace. For the first time in years, I wanted to join something to make new friends, and I said yes happily. The next days were spent exploring homes with Brenda until I found a small 2-bedroom house with a front yard and a back deck overlooking the water. It cost $50,000, a price I could manage, so I made an offer that was accepted quickly. 2 weeks later, after signing papers and transferring the money, I became the owner of a home that belonged only to me. I moved in and bought simple new furniture. A comfortable bed, a small sofa, a dining table facing the ocean, light curtains that let the sunshine in. Everything clean, new and free of old memories. My days settled into a gentle routine. Waking early for coffee on the deck, watching the sunrise, walking barefoot along the beach, collecting shells, letting the cold water touch my feet, feeling more alive than I ever had. Afternoons were for reading long-ignored books and writing in my journal. Evenings were for preparing meals I enjoyed without thinking of anyone else. I joined Gloria's group and met others like me, women and men in their 60s and 70s who had left difficult pasts behind in search of dignity and a second chance. We talked, laughed, and supported one another with real understanding. Months went by peacefully. I phoned Ellie every week to tell her about the ocean, my home, and my new friends. She shared news from the city but never mentioned Malik or Tanisha, and I never asked. 6 months after I arrived, Ellie told me the children had been asking about me, wanting to know if I was okay. I thanked her but said I wasn't ready to speak with them, maybe I never would be. I thought of them sometimes, wondering if they had grown or regretted anything, but I reminded myself that I had given them 5 decades and that the remaining years were mine to live freely. I turned 71 in Coastal Haven and my friends surprised me with a small celebration. Cake, candles, warm hugs and kind words. And for the first time in a very long time I truly felt loved, appreciated and at peace that I believed them because their affection was real, unconditional, not self-interested, just pure and true. Gloria gave me a painting of the ocean, my ocean, the one I watched each morning from my deck. I hung it in my living room as a daily reminder of how far I had come, how brave I had been and how much I had gained by choosing myself. One afternoon I sat on my deck with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, listening to the gentle waves on the shore. I reflected on the Vivian I had been, the woman who rose early to serve others, who cried alone in empty rooms, who settled for scraps of affection, and realized she had stayed behind in that old life. The Vivian I had become was different. A woman who chose herself, took control of her own life, and had the courage to start over when it seemed too late. I opened my diary and wrote the words I had been saving, the words that closed one chapter and began another. I am no longer theirs. I am no longer just Tanisha and Malik's mother or Marcus's widow, or the woman who gave until she had nothing. I am Vivian. Simply Vivian, a 71-year-old woman living by the ocean with true friends, mornings filled with joy, nights of peace and the taste of freedom. My story with them had ended, but my story was only beginning, and it belonged to me alone. No one could take it, no one could ruin it, because I had learned the most important lesson. Self-love is not selfish, taking care of yourself is not betrayal, and choosing your happiness is not cruelty. I closed the diary, looked out at the ocean and felt whole. The waves rose and fell like life itself, endings that were also beginnings, goodbyes.